here we're going to look at inverse functions. So first off, what does an inverse function mean? So if I have a function g, and in this case they give me points, what do those points mean? This is the x and this is the y. When I input this from the domain, I get this out in the range. So what's an inverse function? An inverse function does the exact opposite. If I input 8, I should get out 9. If I input -6, I should get out 7. It takes you back to where you started. So if they gave you these points on g, they ask you for g inverse of 9. Be careful, you're not putting 9 into the original function. G inverse goes backwards. So you're putting in this 9, and you're getting out -5. So it switches all your x and y points. Alright, so then next, what if they gave you an actual function instead of just points? Could you still find the inverse? So if I give you a function like h of x equals 9x plus 4, the inverse would undo all of this. Alright, so first thing you want to do is switch x and y. It's a little easier to see if instead of h of x you write this as y. Means the same thing, right? You input x and you get out h of x, you input x, you get out y. Alright, so first thing you want to do is switch x and y. So where there used to be a y, we're going to write x. And where there used to be an x, we're going to put y. And so now if we solve it for y, we're rearranging it in a way that all of our operations are going to be undone. So we'll subtract 4. Oops. Subtract 4. And then divide both sides by 9. And so notice now that we have y by itself, whatever I'm left with here is the inverse function. So if this was h, this is the inverse. And you can kind of see how it's doing the opposite. If this was times 9 plus 4, this is minus 4 divided by 9. It does the opposite thing, and it does them in the opposite order. Okay, so then another thing they could ask for after this point is, what's h of h inverse of a number or x? So picture composition of functions just like f of g. You're putting -5 into the inverse, and then you're taking the answer and you're putting that into h. Alright, if I know my properties of inverses, I can tell you before you start. Maybe we'll still do it just to make sure it works, but I can tell you before it starts that the answer is going to be -5. How do I know that? Well, the way the inverse works and the function is they're the opposite of each other. So if I put -5 into the inverse, I end up at some number here. If I put that number into the function, I end up back where I started, because if it's the inverse, it's supposed to be exactly the opposite. So I already know this is probably going to be -5. Well, let's try it. So if I put -5 into h inverse, so -5 minus 4, so -9 over 9, I get -1. And then if I put that into the original function, so -9 plus 4, I get -5.